When is a mini PC no longer a mini PC? We've seen a lot of form factors under this umbrella term, and this one is by far the biggest of them all. Not only is it the biggest gaming device that I've ever tested on this channel, but it is also the most powerful. How's it going, everyone? My name is Taki, and this is the NUCXI5 from Minisforum. So yeah, this is something that I've been looking forward to since it was announced. We've seen a lot of mini PCs flood the market over the last year with about the same performance between them, but this is an entirely different situation. It's also an absolute unit compared to the other products from this company. In the box, you get the Tower of Power itself, a manual, an HDMI cable, and a power brick. This is a 230 watt power adapter, and it was smaller than I was expecting. We are essentially using laptop components here, but we will be able to push this over 150 watts on a full load. We will install it in just a moment, but this also comes with a base to keep the computer upright. When it comes to the design and layout, this product resembles a thick laptop with a lot of additional surface area. I'll talk more about this later in this video, but most of our I/O is on the front side of this unit, so cable management can be a bit challenging at times. A lot of attention went into increasing airflow and heat dissipation on this device, and you can get a sense of this when you check out the air intake vents on the side. There is no mesh to these holes, so you might end up needing to clean this out more than a traditional computer, but I do think it looks nice. When it comes to the specs, it's important to note that there are two models for this product series. This one is on loan from Minisforum, and it comes with an i5 11400H processor and an RTX 3060 mobile GPU. There's a 3070 version of this with an i7 processor that will be much more capable than this, but this one is still very good. Now, before we take a look at system performance, I do want to just go over the BIOS. Typically, when you get a device like this, you only get one BIOS update, and it's the one that comes with your device. So people usually want to know if the BIOS is unlocked, and that doesn't seem to be the case here. We don't have a lot of options that you usually see in a mini PC. Now, something cool that I'm seeing on this that I don't typically see in mini PCs is an undervolting tab under the advanced section. If we go in there, you have the ability to set the core voltage offset and the GT voltage offset. These are both set at 0 by default, and I'm not really going to bother messing around with them. Now, if we head over to the performance section, this is a bit more bare bones than I'm used to on mini PCs. We only have two options here. The first one is the processor option, and in here we can enable and disable some basic CPU functions. Typically in a section like this, you would have access to TDP controls, but we don't seem to have that on the BIOS level. Additionally, we also have a memory section. Now, when it comes to customizing the RAM that you have installed on this board, you don't have a lot of options here. You can just go with the default profile that they already have set, or you can go in and make a custom profile, but you're only able to change the reference clock and the memory multiplier. But yeah, that's basically everything that we have here when it comes to the BIOS. I don't know if they're going to do an update later on to unlock more functionality out of this, but this is what we have access to right now on version 2740. I usually get asked if these devices come with the games and ROMs that I use to showcase them, so I did want to show off that that is not the case. On your first boot, you are going to be setting up a fresh Windows 11 install. I typically then install all the software that I'll use for the review, like apps, emulators, and Steam, so I can test and film the device. Now that I've already gone ahead and done that, let's take a look at some benchmarks. Up first, we have a set of 3D Mark scores. I went ahead and ran 4 different tests for this, and I got decent scores for each one. I also went ahead and did some Geekbench 5 tests, and this was pretty strange. My initial scores were pretty high for all 3 tests, but I did a follow-up test in the turbo mode and my scores were cut in half. Since then, I've restarted the computer and updated the GPU drivers, and I ended up getting the highest scores that I've gotten thus far in the same mode. For OpenCL, I got a score of 100,000. For Vulkan, I got a score of 83,000. And when it comes to the CPU performance, I got a single core score of 1486 and a multi-core score of 7194. These are all very good scores for a gaming device, and I think this PC will be able to handle anything that I throw at it. I also went ahead and did a benchmark of the hard drive that's in here. Sometimes with these companies, hard drives can change between the review samples and the retail devices that end up getting shipped out, but these are the scores that I got with the drive that came with my review unit. Now that we've covered all of the benchmarks, it's time to see how this thing handles PC games. I'm expecting great things given the fact that this has a 3060 in it, because that's a lot more powerful than the GPUs that I typically test on this channel. I've gone ahead and connected the device to a wireless controller, and I switched over the big picture UI to the Steam Deck UI for this to make it look more like a console. This is just a much easier way to make this device seem more like a console and less like a PC. Now before we start looking at the actual gameplay footage, there is one feature of this that I want to explain, the game mode or the turbo mode of this PC. So right now at the top of the screen you can see all of the stats of this system. The most important thing here is the TDP of the CPU and the TDP of the GPU. In this instance I have control running at the highest settings with an uncapped frame rate, and we are using 28 watts in the CPU and we are using 118 watts in the GPU. This gives us 71 or 72 FPS in the scene that's happening right now. But this is with the game turbo option on the front of the PC. If I disable that, you're gonna see the GPU TDP go down significantly. We're gonna go from about 120 down to 95, and our GPU clocks are also going to go down to about 1500. From what I can see so far, this doesn't really have an impact on the CPU performance of the system. It really only impacts the GPU itself. And in this case, you can see we only dropped about 5 FPS in this game. So it's not a big difference, but it does give you a boost. And if you don't mind the extra power draw, you should just leave it on all the time to get the most out of this system. The only consequence of having this on is the fact that the fan speeds will ramp up a bit. But again, if you have speakers in your room, you're not going to hear this fan at all. It's much quieter than a real PC would be. If you think about it, these are laptop parts that are built inside a case with a lot of cooling that you wouldn't see inside a laptop, so we are able to exploit this system to some extent. So for our first PC game, we have Control with the resolution set to 1080p with the graphics settings maxed out, and the game is running very well with VSync on at a locked 60 FPS. Now we're going to look at God of War, and this is a game that I've played for about 10 hours or so on this PC. I have a good idea of how most of this game runs on this hardware. In the playthrough that I did, I had it on Ultra for about 6 hours or so, but I did have some dips down into the 50s, so I switched over to high towards the end of the game, and that is what I'll be using for this benchmark. I have the rendering resolution set to 1080p, and I'm not using any resolution scaling options. Next up, we have Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p max settings. Just like our last game, here's Witcher 3 at 1080p with max settings.
Not bad. You didn't. Oh, I'm too old to scurry. Besides, what could you do to me?
Continuing, here we have Jedi Fallen Order, also at 1080p with max settings. You might be picking up on a pattern by now, but here is GTA 5 at 1080p with max settings. Now let's switch over to some emulation tests. For our first system, we will take a look at 3DS performance using the Citra emulator. I have the rendering resolution set to 6x native, and we are using the turbo option on the front of the PC. You might notice that our GPU clocks go under 1 GHz from time to time. When that happens, our FPS will also dip, but this happens regardless of the rendering resolution, so I've just opted to keep it at 6x native for 1440p. Our next system is GameCube, and I will only test a single game for this because I am planning to do another video just on emulation. The game that I've picked for this is one that doesn't run well on a lot of other systems. I've gone ahead and set the rendering resolution to 6x native, which gives us a 4K resolution, and this game is running very well.
Great shot, Luke.
To test Wii, we will stick with the same emulator and all of the same settings. This is still set to 6x native, and this game is running very well. We will look at more WiiU emulation in my next video, but I did want to showcase at least one game with the CMU emulator. I'm using the Vulkan backend for this, and I have the rendering resolution set to 2K for this game. I more so just wanted to see if something like this was possible on this hardware. So yeah, here we are in Breath of the Wild, and the game is having no issues so far. We are even compiling some shaders in the background, but it's still maintaining a solid 60 FPS. Now I am noticing that my GPU clocks are almost maxed out, so we might not be able to go higher than 2K resolution for this, but this is great performance considering everything that's going on. Oddly enough, our GPU power consumption is only at 71 watts with near max clocks, even though this can go well over 100 watts in other situations. Now I want to look at Switch performance with the Yuzu emulator. I have the resolution set to 4K for this, and this system is having no issues with this game. This game is a native 30 FPS, which is why you see that it only says 30 FPS at the top of my screen.
Over already.
This is a system that's going to warrant more tests in a follow-up video, but here is Xbox 360 with the Xenia emulator. This is another 30 FPS game, but it is at native resolution. I'll point out that we do have some screen tearing issues with this title. I also wanted to test out Xbox emulation since that is a newer system that I've started to include in these videos. I used the XMU emulator for this, and I have the game set to 2x native resolution. 4x native was a bit too slow, so I had to drop down to 2x for this game. Let's finish off this section of the video with a quick look at PS3 performance. We are using the RPCS3 emulator for this, and this game is running at native resolution. Now that we've covered the performance of this system, I want to do a teardown and talk about some of my impressions after using this for a few days. As I've said, this design is pretty much meant to be used as a tower, but I kind of wish that there was a way to lay it down like you can with a console. The problem with doing that would mean that you would limit some of your air intake, and I am worried that the system might throttle, but I still need to test that. I'm thinking about getting some standoffs to try and increase the height of this while laying down, so there is still enough room for air to come into this because I really like this product. One complaint that I do have after testing this is that I wish there were more ports on the back of this device. As you can see, we have just a barrel jack, a network port, an HDMI port, and a single Thunderbolt port. In comparison, the front has a lot more I/O. At the top, we have our power button and our TDP switch that gives us a 25-watt boost to the GPU, but we also have 3 USB 3.2 ports, an SD card reader, and a headphone jack. While testing this out, I did find myself wanting to reach for a Type-C dock at times because I was running out of USB ports. My normal desktop PC has 6 ports alone just on the back, and an additional 3 on the front, so dropping down to 4 is a bit limiting in that sense. Having most of these ports in the front of the device also means the cable management is more annoying than it could have been if they would have put 2 or more of these ports on the back. After I opened up the unit, I was surprised to see just how much open space there was. If you can imagine, this open area would be where a battery would go if this was a laptop and not a desktop PC. We clearly have a lot more room for I/O on the front, and it seems the only way we would have got more ports on the back would have been if the layout of this board was significantly changed. There's just no way with the heatsink where it is right now. But anyway, that's going to be it for this one. This is an impressive product all things considered, but it is a pricey one. Bare bones pricing on the one that I used in this video starts at around $850, so this isn't going to be for everyone, but it does handle a lot of games. Let me know your thoughts down below and consider leaving a like if you enjoyed this video. Happy gaming everyone. Taki out.